On today's show, a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade is coming, potentially before the deadline. Could the Nets be involved, and how will the sweepstakes affect the markets of Michael Porter Jr. and others? I'll answer that on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now the number one sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik, Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, the NBA trade deadline is 8 days away, and the entire league has its eyes on Giannis Antetokounmpo. How will his sweepstakes affect the Nets trade prospects? I got Hoopshype insider Michael Scotto coming on the show to discuss that. Let's go. We're 8 days away from the trade deadline, so that means you guys know who has to be on the show. That's Hoopshype's Michael Scotto, the resident NBA insider here on the Locked On Nets podcast. And Scotto, we got some big news today. We got a report about Giannis Antetokounmpo from Shams Charania and some others about Giannis being ready for a new home, something that we've heard quite a few times, or at least rumblings about it, but it seems like it's getting real now. And we also heard that the Bucks are willing to listen to offers from several teams that are aggressive. So we're going to talk about Giannis, what impact that could have on the Nets trade prospects. But the first thing that I think we need to answer here, because I've already had Nets fans asking me in wake of this news, can the Nets get involved in this? Could they be a potential suitor for Giannis Antetokounmpo? And I obviously understand why people are asking that, because the Nets are known to have an affinity for Giannis Antetokounmpo since they kind of pivoted away from the KD Kyrie thing and they're trying to rebuild it. That was a guy they had their eye on. My stance on this now is that I don't think it makes sense for them. I think I've, been pretty clear on that since, this offseason, entering this season. I just think that with where their timeline is at, I think they've kind of committed to this rebuild, and it seems like they're doing it the right way so far. And I think trading in all of, a lot of what they have for Giannis, who's 31 years old, it just doesn't match the timeline. I don't think it's the right time for them. But I will say that I don't think they can be ruled out because they have the assets. They're in the New York market. So they can be in play if they want to. But what is your read on that situation? How do you think that they could be a factor in this?
Yeah, I had a couple of fans in my DMs asking me about the Nets too, brother, immediately. Everybody's itching for news at this point, and I get it. But with that said, for Giannis, look, he's kind of been the great white whale for the Nets, and I feel like for a lot of other teams. But like you said, I don't know about the timeline right now fitting. Certainly the Nets have a boatload of picks the size of Noah's Ark to offer in a trade. You could come up with some matching salaries, but I don't think they have the blue chip prospect that Milwaukee would be looking for in a trade, at least on the roster right now. Could it be in a pick this year or future picks? Yeah, but if you're the Nets, you've got to have other pieces around Giannis to contend for a title now, and quite simply, they're not there right now.
Yeah, the issue with it for me is the only reason, or the only way that I would see that being plausible or wise for them, is if they could get Giannis Antetokounmpo, have enough assets left over to get a second guy that they could pair with him. And, I think I've heard things since the fallout from the Mikal Bridges trade, and they were kind of in that limbo phase. I had heard things, since then, which I'm sure you have as well, that they had the infinity for Giannis Antetokounmpo, and they really liked that small, explosive guard up there in Cleveland. And, that was kind of a pairing that I think if they had their way, that was something that they were kind of trending towards, or they thought could be a possibility for them. So if they could pull off something like that, not necessarily Donovan Mitchell, like that's how I think it becomes interesting. But at that point, I think that that's pretty far-fetched at this point, and you'd have such little assets after that to fill out the rest of the team. And it must be said, like, if the Nets are making that trade with the Bucks right now, as you said, they don't have the blue chip prospect. They would need to overwhelm them with picks. And if I'm the Bucks, I'm asking for that 2026 first-round pick to be included in that trade. And if I'm the Nets, I'm not touching that pick in a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. So I don't think it makes sense from that perspective. But what I could see for the Nets is them being involved in these talks as a third team, because they have that $15.2 million in cap space. And we know in this new CBA that there's always needs, for teams to be facilitators and kind of make things easier for other teams around the league. What do you think about that, the prospect of them getting involved in that kind of capacity?
Yeah, look, well, first off, you touched on, the Nets 2026 pick. I mean, I know people were asking me too, oh, what about the Atlanta Hawks? Well, I would say the same thing for them. Are they really going to want to part with potentially the number one pick in this draft that they have via the Pelicans? I don't know if they really want to do that right now. And equally for Milwaukee, I just want to say first, like, when I've been asked about the whole Giannis thing, unless you're blowing them away with an offer right now, they can wait until the summer, and at that point, you're going to know where the lottery shakes out. And on top of that, for Milwaukee, you're going to have other teams that are interested in Giannis that are going to have more draft picks available to trade in the upcoming years. For some teams, multiple. That's going to matter in trade talks. As far as the Nets and what you touched on with their willingness to be a facilitator, it's not just in a potential Milwaukee trade, it's across the league. They've got to use that $15.3 million cap space, get some assets back. Ideally, we've touched on this podcast, and I've reported on it about, their willingness to try to take on Anthony Simons from Boston and help them with the luxury tax situation, but they would only do it for a first. I understand that stance because it's a lot of money you'd be taking on. But obviously things have shifted for Boston, and there's not as much of a need for that. But across the league, there are a lot of teams that are trying to get below the luxury tax. Whether it's off the top of my head, the Phoenix Suns, the Denver Nuggets, you've got the Orlando Magic as well. There's a lot of teams that want to.
76ers could be in there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how Nets fans would feel about another trade with the Sixers again after the Ben Simmons saga.
But yeah, the Nets can definitely be involved as a third team in a lot of different trades across the league. And we're going to get into how this Giannis sweepstakes is affecting, some of the Nets' other potential trade guys, whether you talk about Michael Porter Jr. or others. But I think all Nets fans are interested in how is this Giannis situation going to play out? Who are the potential teams, if not the Nets, that he could go to? And I'm curious to get your opinion on that. Me, when I look across the league, I think like the Knicks and the Heat are two of the teams that have been interested or have been reported to be logical destinations for Giannis. I think it makes sense, as you said, for them to wait till the offseason. The Knicks, the Heat, a lot of other teams will have more picks around the draft. But then it also enters into a conversation of, will Giannis exert more power, in the offseason when he only has 1 year left on his contract? We'll see. But for me, the team that I was looking at, I tweeted this earlier today, I think the Golden State Warriors make a lot of sense in this regard. Because if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, if you can look at that and you can look at a core that is going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's 31, Steph who's 37, Draymond who's 30, whatever, he's old too. And they're going all in around an aging core. Those distant picks that you could get would be really valuable, in my opinion. I think some of the most valuable assets that the Bucks could get. So I think that's a destination that makes a lot of sense for Giannis.
You can get, if you're the Bucks, you can get those future picks when Golden State should be theoretically trending down, as you touched on. Jonathan Kuminga is another name that you can kind of sell your fan base on, as this is a young guy. He hasn't been able to achieve the potential that he thinks he's capable of. And, they'd have a pretty flexible contract with him to work with. They've got a bunch of other guys, Brandon Podjemski as well, Moses Moody, a lot of younger pieces there you can conceivably build a package around. Jimmy Butler, because of his contract, I'm sure Golden State would, look to consider at that point if they're going to make a big splash like that, because, the math has to math. So I get that sense. You touched on the Knicks. It would probably behoove them to wait until the summer when they could offer more picks. Same thing with Miami, who has Khalil Ware as well. They've got Milwaukee native Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez Jr. You've got a lot of different pieces there who, by the way, is, in my opinion, Lucas Kaplan's twin lookalike. I've said this to everybody in the media room, and I think it needs to be shared publicly.
You said Jaime?
I think Jaime Jaquez.
Is it Jaquez or Giddy? I don't know which one. Which one?
It used to be Giddy, but then the long hair changed.
The goatee.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. I think that the Warriors make sense. I mean, as I said, the Knicks are going to be involved. Just as a sidebar, how funny would it be, if the Knicks are having trouble, they're not able to swing a deal for Giannis, and I don't think it's going to happen, but the Nets swing the deal for Giannis with the picks that the Knicks traded for Mikal Bridges. I mean, if you're talking about entertainment in the New York market, that would give me
that'd be a subplot. That'd be a nice plot twist. But you know what else? Eric, just in general, like I've always said to myself, if they wanted to, I felt like the San Antonio Spurs have a lot of pieces that can make sense to do a trade. Same thing with the Rockets, but ever since they got Durant, I think that narrative has shifted a little bit for them. And I don't think anybody would say this, but, Oklahoma City, if they ever wanted to, they could. I'm just saying plausibly. I'm not reporting that they have, but, it's like it also depends, too. What does Giannis want to do? Because he's going to be in a little bit of the driver's seat to kind of figure out where he wants to go, because he's going to have flexibility because he has a player option after next season on his contract. So you kind of got to work with Giannis a little bit, because if a team is going to trade for him, they're not going to want him as a rental. They're going to want him knowing that, okay, eventually when they can offer him a $275 million extension, he's signing for the next 4 years after when it's allowed.
Yeah, and I would say that, this is going to hold up a lot of things going into the deadline. Last thing on the Knicks, I think that actually has some relevance to the Nets, because the Nets own all of the Knicks' future picks. I wouldn't at all rule them out, because we know that Giannis had his eye on there. There have been reports that have come out since that he's more open to other potential destinations. But I'd say with the Knicks, unless they can swing a deal with Portland or New Orleans, New Orleans owns Milwaukee's pick in 2027. Portland has the other 2 swaps. Unless they can do that and get some of those picks back and then send Cat and something else to Milwaukee, it would be a little bit of a convoluted deal. And I think there's just a lot of teams I think who are going to be able to offer more. So I could be wrong. I don't see the Knicks as the most likely destination there, but this is going up to the deadline. As you said, I think it's smarter for the Bucks to wait until the summer. But if that is the case and they do wait until the summer, this could go right up until the deadline buzzer. And that will hold up a lot of things around the league, because a lot of people are waiting to see how this plays out before they get into the other deals. And that will affect Michael Porter Jr., who is, a lot of people perceive as the top player on the market. So how could it affect MPJ? What are we hearing about MPJ, and what is his trade market looking like? We'll get into all that when we continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, let's be real. Managing your finances can feel overwhelming. Between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has the time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in. The personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Guys, what I love about Rocket Money is how it showed me what I was just paying for specific subscriptions that I completely forgot about. It's already saved me money. I love how it tracks all my subscriptions and lets me cancel them right in the app with just a few taps. No more hunting down customer service numbers. The automatic transaction categorization is a game changer. I can finally see exactly where my money is going each month. You can set budgets and goals, get personalized insights, and receive real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, and low balances. It even consolidates your checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard so you get a clear view of your entire financial picture. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode, got Hoopshype's Michael Scotto here, talking about the Giannis sweepstakes and the prospects of that holding up some other deals around the league. And for the Nets and a lot of other teams, that could mean Michael Porter Jr., who's perceived to be the top player on the market. Scotto, what are you hearing? Because I feel like, from things that I've been hearing, from things that I've just seen coming out, it seems like a lot of other deals are placed on the back burner now until this Giannis situation gains clarity. And that probably will affect, or definitely will affect, the MPJ trade landscape leading up to that deadline buzzer.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the case. Giannis Antetokounmpo is the top name. Everything else comes second, third, fourth fiddle to him by far. Look, Michael Porter Jr. has had an all-star caliber season this year, no question. But we're talking apples and oranges here between Giannis and Michael Porter Jr. Look, I think for a lot of teams around the league, as you said, this is going to go up to the deadline with Giannis, and they're all waiting to see. Outside of when the Knicks pushed a lot of their chips in the center of the table from Mikal Bridges, you're not usually going to see teams doing that early on before they know what's going to happen. And in this case with Giannis Antetokounmpo. So, I mean, this saga's been dragging on ever since they stretched Damian Lillard, and you could see the trajectory of where this Bucks team was going And now it's come to a head. So for Michael Porter Jr., whether it's Domantas Sabonis, John Morant, you name it, Anthony Davis, everybody waiting in line. Giannis is the first domino that has to fall.
Yeah, and that, is pretty significant because there are teams that are involved in this potentially who could be in the market for a guy like Michael Porter Jr. Like we just talked about the Warriors, and, if they can't swing a deal for a guy like Giannis, do I think that they're going to trade a lot for Michael Porter Jr.?
No.
Probably not, but like they could still be in the market. You look at like the Bucks were a team that people were talking about. There's just a lot of other teams. I mean, I threw out the Spurs, the Heat, like all those teams are teams that could potentially get in the market, and it makes sense. They could have logical packages, but if the Giannis thing is going on, they're not going to be giving up any of their assets. They're going to be trying to keep their powder dry.
Yeah, but I'd also say this about Michael Porter Jr. Look, at the end of the day, let's just say he remains with the Nets through the trade deadline. Okay, so he's a guy that's been an all-star caliber player, and then next season he's on an expiring contract. Still valuable. So, I don't think it necessarily moves the needle that much for what the difference would be for Michael Porter Jr., what he would get now versus the offseason. I think the only question is, does he remain healthy? That, of course, has always been the X factor for him and any value that he has, whether it's contractually or in a possible trade.
Yeah, and I'd also say, there is still the tank conversation. I think that that's kind of been quelled a little bit because the Nets are 2-13 over their last 15, I think, and that's with...
You want me to let you in on a secret?
Go ahead.
After the trade deadline, I would venture to say if Michael Porter Jr. and Cam Thomas are on this team, their minutes are going to get reduced, and Brooklyn is going to see what they have in the Flatbush Five and the rest of the guys on this team, because you know what you have in Michael Porter Jr., you know what you have in Cam Thomas. Again, this is if both of them are here through the trade deadline. You're trying to figure out, what has Sean Marks said all the time? What has he always said? We're trying to figure out who the future Nets are. Okay? So
that sounded a little Russian almost. Like you got like a Nets.
Who's part of the call? Okay? So they're going to find out by playing these guys. I know what Michael Porter Jr. can do. I've seen him score 30 points a bunch of times. He makes crazy shots. Cam Thomas, I know he could score. I've seen it. I don't know yet what Ben Seraf can do. I want to see more what Nolan Traore can do. I want to see more Drake Powell. What else can he do? Danny Wolf. Diego Drummond.
Point taken. My point being, I very much expect them to hold MPJ out, potentially even shut him down. I don't think you can shut him down for the whole, 40% of the season after the trade.
Hurt his value otherwise.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is, like, the margin between, moving up to, you can move up 3 spots right now, like in the draft lottery standings. It's a 1-game margin. So, like, him being on the team, he's going to give them a better chance to win some games. Do I think that they can keep him and still be fine tanking? Absolutely. But I will say, like, it's not a non-factor in the calculus. There also is the question of, you look at MPJ, some of the teams that are potentially trading for him right now, if you trade for him at the deadline, it's the prospect of having 2 playoff runs with him versus 1, which I do think makes somewhat of a difference in his value. And I've also said, like, I said this on my podcast yesterday, from things I've heard, there is a sell high mindset surrounding MPJ. They're comfortable keeping him into the offseason, but I definitely think that if there's a deal that they feel good about or even decent about, I could see them talking themselves into it around the deadline. But, have you heard anything about MPJ alongside, like, in regard to the teams that could be involved with him? Because I pointed to some teams like the Detroit Pistons, the San Antonio Spurs, the Miami Heat. Maybe you could talk yourself into, like, the Los Angeles Clippers, but it seems like everybody's kind of sitting on their hands right now. But are any of those teams that you see as more logical?
You could talk yourself into a lot of teams. You could talk yourself theoretically into the Detroit Pistons, the Los Angeles Lakers. A lot of teams you could talk yourself into, but I feel like if there was a substantive offer on the table that really was going to move the needle, he wouldn't have been a Net at this point. So that's just the reality. So, again, we've touched on it. Giannis is the domino that's got to fall. Everything else comes secondary. So I feel like until that happens, Brooklyn probably wouldn't get, logically, the best offer for Michael Porter Jr. that maybe people would think, because the Giannis domino would have to fall first.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a sentiment around Nets fans that, supposedly the asking price for Michael Porter Jr. right now is in the range of 2 first-round picks, and I feel like there's a sentiment, among Nets fans of, it's like 2 first-round picks or bust. I've seen some even say like 2 first-round picks and a prospect. And I've been pushing back and saying I do not see a team trading 2 good first-round picks for Michael Porter Jr. I don't think the Nets are going to get that. I think that is, a little bit too exorbitant for, what he's going to be, especially with the extension that he's going to be seeking. And I think Chris Mannix from Sports Illustrated put out a report yesterday that he said that if the Nets don't get that kind of 2 first-round pick offer, there is a feeling amongst rival teams that they are going to be willing to come down from that as we get closer to the deadline. So we'll see. But what do you think about the market for Michael Porter Jr., about what the asking price realistically the market will bear out to? Do you think that 2 first-round pick price tag is a little rich?
I mean, I think it's going to be hard to get. Well, I'll say this, it depends. Are you taking money back longer term that a team doesn't want to offload? In general, you've got the Raptors, for example, that are in a bunch of trade talks with players like Emmanuel Quickley, Jakob Poeltl, guys that have long-term money that a lot of teams don't want. But can you sell it to them by adding a first-round pick or two? Maybe. You could. Do you protect it? There's a lot of variance to all this stuff. So for the Nets with Michael Porter Jr., on the surface, you may say, well, he's an all-star. You want to try to get 2 first-round picks. You got 2 playoff runs like you touched on. Yeah, but those type of picks have been so valuable to teams. And, it's not like he's cheap either. We're talking about $40 million. You got to kind of get to that number. Well, actually, I guess not for the Nets because they got cap space. But there's a lot of factor in here for that. So, I mean, big picture to me, I don't know. I don't know if I see 2. Would they do it for 1? Well, what's the first round pick? The biggest thing for the Nets is they're in asset acquisition mode. So is the first round pick that they're going to get worth more to them than Michael Porter Jr.? Or is having Michael Porter Jr. on this team next year when they're trying to get better and improve more advantageous? That's a question that only they're going to know when they get these firm offers and they evaluate. But again, it just comes down to which asset is more valuable, Michael Porter Jr. or the pick and or salary that would come with it from another team.
Yeah, and it must be said that not all first-round picks are created equal. Like a lot of people were talking about Cam Johnson and the prospect of the Nets getting 2 first-round picks for him. They didn't, but they got an unprotected 2032 Denver Nuggets pick, which that's the value of 2, not so good first round picks. I also think that there is something to be said about, I think fans maybe haven't caught up to, the first round picks are much more valuable in this new CBA as opposed to what they were in the last one. I think they were always valuable, but having picks, those are the new currency of the NBA. Guys aren't hitting free agency. You need to have financial flexibility and picks. So teams are going to be a lot more wary of trading stuff like that. And that's why I don't see 2 good first-round picks for Michael Porter Jr. Yeah. I don't really see that. But, maybe I'm wrong. Michael Porter Jr. balled at 36 points in that Suns game. Before we go to the next segment, what do you think about the Yegor Dioman, Dylan Brooks melee at the end of that Suns game? That was really something.
I think if you're going to shove somebody and start something, you can't just totally walk away.
That's fair. That's fair. Yegor talked about it after the game, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm not trying to fight anybody, but
don't shove anybody in the first place."
Yeah, and it was also.
By the way, I'd also like to point out, I thought it was interesting. You see Michael Porter Jr. on film shoving Damari Carroll, an assistant coach. I texted Damari after. I was like, "I'm surprised you didn't shove him back. I didn't know if you were going to throw him into the first row there." And he got a good laugh out of that, but. Good poise by Damari, trying to diffuse the situation. Zaire Williams looked like he got hurt amid the scrum, ironically. You just don't want to see that. And we're not here for this fake tough guy stuff. It's not like when the Knicks had Chris Childs and people were throwing punches, or the malice at the pals. Usually they don't end up like that. So everybody take it easy and calm down. Yeah,
that's what I said after on my pod yesterday when I was talking about it with Lucas, was like, you got the half-hearted shove from Yegor. You got the flop from Dylan. And you got all these guys running in, trying to act like they're going to fight anybody. Yeah. Nobody's doing anything. Everybody's just holding each other by their shirts. The person who got hit the hardest was Damari, and he was he's not even a player.
And Zaire. And meanwhile, the security guards, they're making their money with that one. And you see all these coaches running in. I thought it was like the bullpens coming in from the outfield when the baseball players fight in the major leagues. What are we doing?
Yeah, that is kind of what it looked like. But, get back on track. We do have Some other Nets trade conversations that I want to get into when we close out the show, particularly Nick Claxton, because there is an emerging center market, it seems like, around the NBA in regard to a couple of contenders that I want to talk about. So we'll get into all that when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the NBA trade landscape, how the Nets could get involved leading up to the deadline. And the next guy that I want to talk about is Nick Claxton, because I think that there have been some reports about some contenders that have a need at center, and Nick maybe could be a fit there. We know that he's the longest tenured Nets player. It seems like alongside Michael Porter Jr., he's the most significant guy who's on the block. And if I'm the Nets, I mean, like logically, me just connecting the dots, you look at the Boston Celtics, they have a need at center right now. They are the second seed in the Eastern Conference. They're going to be getting Jason Tatum back. Maybe they're getting ready to make a significant run. I think that they probably think they can come out of the Eastern Conference this year. And Neemias Queta and Luka Garza and Amari Williams, I don't know if that's cutting it in the playoffs at center. So could Nick Claxton be a fit there? You have the Houston Rockets. They just lost Steven Adams today. And I'm not just Nick Claxton. We also got Day'Ron Sharpe. But just the Nets have two centers. There's some teams that have center needs. The Lakers, another team that seem like have a center need. It seems like there is a market for centers around the league, and Nick isn't the only name on the market, but he is one of the more significant names. And then you also have Day'Ron, who's cheaper, and I think a lot of teams would also have interest in. I reported last year the Lakers and some other teams had interest in Day'Ron last season. And I think you said the Celtics this summer. So two valuable centers, and it seems like there is a need for centers across the league.
Yeah, but I mean, when it comes to Nick Claxton, I had touched on the Pacers and the Warriors had kind of checked in a little bit there. But again, it's more money. I know it's descending money, but it's still $20+ million on your books. For Boston, I mean, right now they're already budgeting above the apron. How much more do they want to go above that? If you're going to get a guy like Nick, is it worth it? How much more of a difference maker is he for Neemias Queta? Day'Ron Sharpe, like you touch on, you could plug Day'Ron Sharpe anywhere because he's cheaper at $6.25 million, and he's got a team option next year for $6.25 million, which is more advantageous for teams most likely. So, to me, I've kind of touched on this a little bit on Yes when I've been on as well on the network. I think ultimately for the Nets right now, it looks like Nick Claxton would stay, barring anything unforeseen. Regarding Day'Ron Sharpe, this guy that definitely gets interest. Touched on Hoopshype and reporting over the summer that Boston was going to offer him their starting spot, but they only had a minimum to offer. Well, now he's got his contract, but Luka Garza shot the ball well from three, and Amari Williams is at least a candidate to have his contract converted as a third center. So is the juice really worth the squeeze for Boston? I'm not sure. Other teams like Toronto, with Jakob Poeltl's ongoing back issues, may be more advantageous for them to look at it. I mean, years ago, they had interest in Nick Claxton. They were going to offer a first, but it fell through. This was when he was on a much cheaper contract, however. So I don't necessarily think that that's in play now, but just throwing that out there for context. Day'Ron Sharpe, again, a guy that's gotten interest around the league from a lot of teams who do need backup help. So I think, ironically, if you're going to look at the two of them and who could be more movable, I would make the argument it's actually Day'Ron because of his lower salary. And he's a good, productive player.
Yeah, I agree with you there, actually, but I don't think that the Nets necessarily want to move Day'Ron. I've heard that they're very high on him internally, within the organization there, and it makes sense. He's cheap. He's very productive. He's younger. I think when you look at Clax, I think he's going to have value, but I don't think that it's going to be any value at this deadline that warrants the Nets moving off of him. If we're talking about the Celtics, you look at that team, and for them, like Nick Claxton could be a logical fit. I mean, they have this Anthony Simons contract that matches Clax. It seems like he wasn't really a long-term piece there in their vision, even though that he's played well this offseason. But if you're talking about trading Anthony Simons and a first-round pick, perceivably, for Nick Claxton, you're giving up Simons' production, which is kind of necessary alongside Jaylen Brown while Tatum's out. And then you're going from, I think Nick Claxton is much better than Neemias Queta, but like you said, you look at some of the centers around the league, like the guys that you look in the Eastern Conference, the Celtics are going to be trying to go through the Knicks with Karl Anthony Towns and the Pistons with Jalen Duren. And those are two guys that give Nick Claxton a lot of trouble, historically. So,
I'll say this. I mean, I had just reported today on Hoopshype about earlier in the year, the Chicago Bulls, this was before Boston ascended to the second spot in the East, but earlier in the year, Chicago called Boston and pitched a framework of Nikola Vucevic for Anthony Simons and a first-round pick. It would have reduced Boston's tax bill. They wouldn't have got out of the tax, but they would have reduced it. As far as the Nets, all the talks that I had heard around the Nets did not involve Claxton. It was more about whether I'm blanking now, but for Brooklyn, if they were going to give up one of Day'Ron Sharpe and Cam Thomas, along with why am I blanking on?
Yeah, Zaire. It was would they give up one of those $2 $6 million?
Day'Ron was definitely in it, and then whether it was going to be Cam Thomas or Zaire Williams, it's been a long day.
But that would get Boston below
the tax.
Yeah, below the tax, and the Nets would maybe get a first round.
If you're trading Simons, to me, and I've reported this from Boston's standpoint, you're either getting a big upgraded center. Like when they tried to pitch Anthony Simons, a first-round pick, and a pick swap to the Clippers for Ivica Zubac and whatever salary filler they needed to make it work, that makes sense to me. Like that guy fits. He's in his prime, control for multiple years. Totally get it. Obviously, the Clippers said no, and then they went on their incredible run that they're on right now. So that's pretty much out the window. But I got that logic. To just trade Anthony Simons to duck below the luxury tax now doesn't really make much sense either while Boston's the number 2 seed. It sends a bad message to your fan base and the team if you did something like that.
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to do that. And that's why, I don't think that the Claxton thing makes all too much sense for them. And if we're saying, just talking about Claxton's trade market, I think that you look at it, going into this summer, he's going to have 2 years left on his contract. It's going to be cheaper because it's descending. And I think at that point, more teams have, more picks to trade. There's just more assets out there around the draft. I think that the Nick thing is much more likely in the offseason, I think. And then I think the MPJ thing could be more likely to happen before the deadline compared to Nick. But yeah, and then Day'Ron Sharpe, I don't know. If I'm the Nets, unless I get something that I find really enticing, I'm not trading Day'Ron Sharpe for just a late, first round pick or something like that might be in the late 20s. I would want to hold on to Day'Ron Sharpe. I would want to extend him at a reasonable number and then see what you can get with him, because I think he's at an age where you're going to get offers, or you at least his market will hold, I think, into the future if he's on a reasonable contract in this new CBA. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, if you can get a first-round pick for Day'Ron Sharpe, I think you got to listen to that.
Well, I think you'll listen. I think, as I said, all first-round picks aren't created equal. It depends on what kind of pick that we're talking about.
I don't care if it's in the 20s. You got to listen to that. To me, you got to listen.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I wouldn't listen. I'm saying that I don't know if I'm, necessarily going to be trading Day'Ron for something like that. I mean, you look at a lot of those picks, in the late 20s, how many of those players turn into a player who's as impactful as what Day'Ron is right now? I'm not saying the Nets wouldn't listen. I'm just saying that I think that the Nets have a high viewpoint of what Day'Ron can turn into, especially on the kind of contract. I mean, if you can extend Day'Ron on a 4 for $48 or something like that, and you have him at $12 million a year for the next 4 years as the salary cap's rising, I think that that's a deal that's going to retain value. So I kind of see it as, why are you selling off this early? And I understand, I've had the conversation of you might have to pick between Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe. I don't know if, Day'Ron's the guy that I would be getting off of. That's my point.
Yeah, and I mean, they seem to be playing Danny Wolf at the 4. I thought he was going to be more of a 5. I don't know if Danny's really a 4. I don't think defensively he is. So they've got some things to figure out.
All right, Scotto, that's all I had. Anything else you want to leave the Nets fans with before the deadline? We probably won't hear from you again until that deadline buzzer sounds. Any parting thoughts?
I'll be tracking it for all you guys. You don't have to hit me in the DMs. If I got it, I'll put it out. Don't worry.
All right, appreciate you, Scotto, taking the time as always. Everyone go follow Scotto's stuff on Hoopshype. Also follow him on Twitter, a must-follow leading up to the deadline. But we'll circle back. I'm sure we'll have you back on, but appreciate taking the time, man. That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Scotto. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. And that's going to be back in action on Thursday against the Denver Nuggets on the front end of the back-to-back. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.